The subject we're going to talk about tonight is about the mass incident in China. As a Taiwanese, I think the activities like protest or demonstrations is very normal situation to us. In Taiwan, people do things very often. People protest because of they think they are dissatisfied with the political issues. If people dissatisfied the air pollution, they will hold the protest too. Even the gay marriage, those issues will make people do demonstration. And some of you might thought that the same thing will not happen in the other side of the strait, since China is still an authoritarian country. So some people will say, oh, Chinese people cannot protest just like Taiwanese people. No, that's not true. In fact, the protests and demonstrations that happen in China very often, and some of those activities is very violent. So I will introduce the situation to you guys and explain the reason. Okay. Usually the Chinese government they refer those social protests or demonstration with a special term as a mass incident. And the definition of this situation is the protest caused by the contradiction among the people. And they try to express their will and request through the ways like launching a demonstration or protest or even a violent attack. And according to the explanation from some Chinese scholars, there are four basic elements of the mass incidents. First, the number of the participants is quite large. And second is the participants have some common goals and consist actions. And third is the behavior of the participants is illegal and incident has caused some kind of impact to the social order. So, however, I think there is the other elements those Chinese scholars were not mentioned, which is the subject of those protests must against the interest and policy attitude of the party CCP, Chinese Communist Party, and the Chinese government. In other words, if the protest is just match the interest or the policy stance of the Chinese government, then they will be accepted. Let me give you two examples. There are two pictures, which is about the protests and demonstrations about the anti-Japan or anti-American. Because of the issue like Diaoyu Island disputes or Sino-American trade war, people holding those protests to support their government. So of course these activities will be allowed and be defined as legal activities. However, some of this kind of protest is very violent, and that protest is very different with the protest in Taiwan. If you still remember 2014, some students in Taiwan, they want to launch a protest in Taipei and occupy the legislative yuan. And that's totally in order. Students just sit right there, express their requests and ideas, and they're holding the sunflowers. But this is kind of like a riot. It's just not just a protest, right? The number of the mass incidents that happen in China continues to increase. You can see the number. In 1993, the number is 8,000 per year. But in 2005, the number of the mass incidents that happen in China is about 87,000. And the Chinese government decided to stop release the relevant statistical data after 2006 because the number is too bad. It shows the situation is continuing to deteriorate. Interestingly, the well-known media, the Economist, I believe some of you may have heard that before. It's a very famous magazine publications, which used to report it that some Chinese officials tried to convince foreign media that the number of mass incidents that happened in China in 2018 is only 1.3 thousand. But of course, those media do not believe that number, and in their estimation, the real number probably is 10 times or more. So here is a simple picture can help us to understand the increasing trend of the mass incident happening in China. So it shows people in China, they have so many dissatisfaction, and they are holding a lot of protests and demonstration every year. Let me give you a few examples. There's some pictures of the mass incident that happened in China before. This one is the Wuhan incident that happened in China in 2008, which was caused by injustice judicial case. And you can see how violent that is. It's just a riot. And here is the Dongzhou incident happened in 2005. You can see those people sit right there and confront with the military troops. And if you read the related information, you will see in this incident, the PLA, People's Liberation Army, they have shot some people, and many people died. And those people confront with the PLA because they are trying to against the government. The government is trying to build a new thermal power plant in their village. Yeah. And this last year, the JASIC incident happened in 2018. JASIC is a famous company about technology things in China. And some students, college students, and some workers, laborers, they hold this protest to accuse JASIC Corporation to abuse laborers. And we can generally to categorize that China's mass incidents in three major types, depending on the difference between its members' nature, the rural protest, the labor protest, and the middle class protest. In general, most of the rural protests that happen in China are caused by the land acquisition. Do you know what I'm talking about? The people, the government take your lands back and give you some money. How you say that in Chinese? Yes, thank you. Land acquisition. Yeah. Since China doesn't have the private land ownership system, China still have a state-owned system in terms of the lands, right? So, which means people can in China they can only have the long-term land use right. I can use this land, I have this right, but the land is still owned by country. Okay, so which means when the local government try to levy people's land, take your land back. So the compensation that people can get is all depending on the building upon the land. So which is very meager. And considering for the farmers, losing lands is not only means losing their homes, but also losing their jobs, because farmers need a land so they can work in agriculture affairs, right? So if the compensation is not enough, they will definitely walk on the street and fight for themselves. Unfortunately, many Chinese local government, they regard the land acquisition as an easy way to obtain the economic interest. Just imagine this situation. The local government levy the land from farmers at very low prices and sell the land use right to some companies at very high prices. So of course they can obtain a substantial profits through this process. And the reason for this situation, the first one is most of the Chinese local government are heavily in debt. They have too many debt. So those officials believe to levy lands is a very simple way to increase income. And the second reason is about corruption. Some entrepreneurs in China, they will try to bribe officials and ask them to levy some lands to them to get the land that they want. The second one is about the labor protest. Usually in every democratic country in the United States, in European countries, or in Taiwan, when laborers, workers, they encounter the unreasonable treatment or illegal dismissals, they can express their dissatisfaction through the union and to press the government to interfere and make some investigation. For example, if you watch the news today, you will see there are many people discussing the news about the Uber Eats or Food Pandas. If those companies are using their laborers, right? But unfortunately, in China, the organization and operation of the unions are controlled by the government strictly. So most of those unions cannot, protect labor rights. So this situation will force the angry labor to walk on the street and launch a protest for their very own interest. And most of the labor protests in China come from the state-owned enterprises. How do you say that in Chinese? State-owned. Yeah. And since the Mao Zedong era, you can see most of the China's state-owned enterprises, they had to hire a large number of employees, even more than their actual needs. Because the Chinese government want to give most of people, everyone a job, and in order to achieve the ideal of communism. And although the salaries of those employees is very meager, but once you be hired, so you can get some welfare, such like you can have a dormitory or medical aid. However, after the 1978, when China has entered the era of reform and openness, which is a policy that formulated by Deng Xiaoping, in Chinese we call that reform and openness. Yes, yeah. After the reform and openness, if you read history, you can see the Chinese government has opened the door and started to do the business with other countries. And that means China's state-owned enterprises, China's company have to compete with the companies from other countries. So at the first step, they have to save their costs. So a lot of companies started to dismiss their redundant employees. Those employees I don't really need it, so I will dismiss them. When those employees lose their job, when they be fired, they will lose their job. But at the same time, they will also lose all the welfare. They will lose their home. They don't have the dormitory anymore. They don't have the medical aid or other compensation. So this is a double lose of they're losing their job, but at the same time they're losing their life. So those laborers will definitely walk on the street and launch a protest. Here's the other short video made by the New York Times. It's about the China's labor rights protection. So we just mentioned that farmers and laborers they have launched a lot of protests in China in the recent years. But the middle class, in fact, the people from the middle class, they are in China, they usually are not that active for the protest or demonstrations. They're not that interested because most of these people are relatively rich, and those people, most of them live in the big cities like Beijing, Shanghai, Tianjin, those places. And however, although those people are the beneficiaries of the reform and the openness, but with the increase of income, those people have money, so they can go to the college or send their children to go to the college. They have been well educated, so on some level they will understand the importance of rule of law, and they will know they have some kind of citizen rights. So when they're facing some unreasonable phenomena, most of these people will refuse to be silent. So some scholar has indicated that even the people from the middle class in the past, they're not that interesting about launching a protest, but in some kind of circumstances, they will also participate in those incidents. The first circumstances is when their legal rights and interests have been violated, such as those people facing the land acquisition from the local government, but without a reasonable explanation, they will feel angry, or they will against the project of building an incinerator. How do you say that in Chinese? It's a facilities we put all the trash, garbage right there and burn it out. Yes, thank you. Incinerator, or chemical factories or thermal power plants. If the local government wants to build those facilities near the community, then those people will feel angry and they will launch some protests or demonstration against those plans. And here's a very good example. There's a protest happened in the January 2019 in Jinghu County, which is at the east area of Jiangsu province. Hundreds of angry parents, they walk on the street and gathering in front of the county office and surrounded, and they launched the protest and even beat some officials because they are so angry because the county office has applied the expired vaccines. How do you say that? Vaccine, yeah, expired. No, vaccine is yes, to prevent the flu. Yes, on 145 infants, babies. Yeah. So those parents are very, very angry. In this video, you can see the protest that launched by the people from the middle class is also very violent. But the difference with the labor protest and the rural protest is these people, they know how to use the media. Yeah, you can see in the video, those people, when the police try to arrest them, they use their mobile phone to take a video, and of course they will upload on the internet and to accuse the government. So that's the difference about educations. In the second case, people of the middle class will participate in the mass incidents, sometimes even their rights and interests were not being violated, but they just care about some public issues, for example, the environmental pollutions or injustice judicial cases. So just like I mentioned before, those people, when they launch in the protest, which is even harder to be deal with than the rural or labor protest, since they have been well educated and they know how to express their idea and how to use the tools of like mobile phone or internet or social media to gather people and accusing the government. Okay, so there are two major types of the factors that could cause the mass incident, to cause the demonstrations or cause the protest in China. and we can make a simple categorize. The first one is the environmental factors, which means the objective condition that exist within the society. And the second one is the constructive factors, which is some negative affections that created by the interaction between the governments and the citizens. Okay, before we start to discuss about those factors, I would like to take a short break because we have more students right here. So allow me to make a roll call right now. Okay, so now we are going to talk about the factors that can cause the mass incident in China. And just we mentioned before, there are two types of these factors, the environmental factors and the constructive factors. The environmental factors means the objective conditions that exist within the China's society, and which could cause the mass incident. And there are four these types of the factors: the unbalanced economic growth, the severe corruption, the developing consciousness of citizenship, and the incomplete judicial system. First is about the economic issues. And if you look at the history, we have to admit the policy of reform and openness, which proposed by Deng Xiaoping in 1978 and implemented by the Chinese government in past few decades, indeed created amazing economic growth. But at the same time, reform and openness policy also rapidly expanded the wealth gap in China, which means after this, the era of reform and openness, you can see in China there are some people, they live in the big city and very rich, and some people live in rural China and they're still very, very poor. And also the Chinese government has to refuse to release the statistical data about the wealth gap after 2005. You can imagine the reason. Of course, it's because the situation continues to be deteriorate. Most of the economists still believe China is the country with the most serious issues of wealth gap in the world. Now, I think I can give you a very simple indicator. It's not precise, it's not academic, but I think it's very useful to help us to understand how terrible the situation of wealth gap in China is. Some data shows us that there are lots of the overweight children living in China's big cities, fat kids in Beijing, Tianjin, Nanjing, those big cities. But at the same time, there are lots of children living in the rural China village. They have the malnutrition problems. How do you say that in Chinese? Yes, malnutrition, yeah. So this kind of economic injustice will definitely cause the protest and demonstration in China. Environmental factors that could cause the mass incident in China is the severe corruption. I don't even think I should give you accurate data. You just look at the anti-corruption campaign, which launched by Xi Jinping after he took office in 2012. You can realize how terrible the corruption situation in China is. And the main reason for this situation is because Chinese officials, their salaries is very meager, but they have enormous power at the same time. So some officials will try to work with companies, work with some enterprise. They will accept the bribes from those entrepreneurs and use their power to help them, to serve them. For example, they can help them to levy the lands they want, or approving the project of building some high pollution facilities for those enterprises. The third factors that could cause the mass incidents in China is the developing consciousness of citizenship. Although China is still a democratic country, but when people's income is gradually increased and many people has been well educated, a lot of people they went to the college. So some people will know the importance of the rule of law and their civil rights. So when they're facing some unreasonable phenomena, they were choosing to confront with the government. So if you look back at the mass incident that happened in China in past few years, a lot of these kind of protests, they claim they are legal protests. The members of those protests, they claim that their legal rights has been violated by some enterprises, local governments, corrupt officials. So I have no choice but to come out and fight for ourselves. And the last factors is about the incomplete judicial system. As we know, China's judicial system, the courts, they are led the independence. So, which means the judicial system in China is easily to be manipulated by the administrative system. So, which means when people try to sue the local government and officials because of the wrong policies or corruption, they often cannot get the fair judgment. And considering China's judicial system also lacks the execution, so even people can win a lawsuit, they can get a fair judgment. Eventually, they probably will find out they still cannot get the compensation. So the only way to help them to protect their self-interest is to join the protest or demonstration. And the other type of the factors that can cause the protests and demonstrations in China is the constructive factors, which is the negative affections caused by the interaction between government and people, citizens. And there are two this kind of factors: accountability system and psychological anticipation. Accountability system in China means Beijing, the central government, they set some kind of performance indicator for the local government. For example, the economic growth rate, the criminal rates, things like that. So if the local officials, they can successfully to reach those targets, for example, those officials can make the economic growth rate higher and the criminal rates lower, then they will be rewarded. But if those officials, they fail to reach those targets, then they will be criticized or even be punished. And the intention of this system is very good because Beijing, they want to use this system to encourage or force local officials to work harder. But there's a huge mistake to include the occurrence of mass incidents into the list of indicators. Which means when the mass incidents, when the protests happen, the local officials will be punished by the central government. So that's what happened in Hong Kong. And my friend who lives in Hong Kong, he told me that they know they will be failed, but they have to struggle before they fail for their pride and dignity. Yeah. Although the mass incident in China continues to increase, but most of these activities still have great limitations. First, most of the protests cannot host the wide support within the society. Which means when laborers launching a protest, farmers or people of the middle class, they don't care about it. When people in Beijing, they launch a protest, people in Wuhan or Chengdu, they don't care about it. So most of the mass incidents are very isolated. And that means if the local government can deal with that properly, then they can end up those protests very soon. And the second limitation is most of these mass incidents are focused on the economic issues or low politics issues. And those people, they are trying to not touch some sensitive issues like democratization. Because for the Beijing, for the CCP, Xi Jinping, if people launch a protest for accusing some economic issues, that's probably okay. But if people launching a protest and they want to, party rotation, they want to Xi Jinping leave the government, then that won't be unacceptable. Yeah. So people will try to not to touch those sensitive issues in order to avoid the risks to be repressed, just like the things that happened in 1989 Tiananmen incident. But for the long term, you have to realize some unreasonable phenomena that happen in China. The only way to solve those problems is to make some kind of political reform. Unless those problems will not be solved, like the incomplete judicial system or corruption. So you have to make some kind of transformation or political reform. And just like the video shows to us, the protest that happened in Hong Kong in 2019 has caused a great problem to Beijing. And because the purpose of those protests is not for their economic interests. Those people, what they want is to defending their democracy, freedom, or fundamental rights. And although those people has criticized Xi Jinping and the Beijing government publicly, and you can imagine how mad the political elites in CCP was. But they still cannot send the military troops to repress Hong Kong people, because Hong Kong is a well-known financial center in Asia, and it has received a lot of attention from the international community. So in Taiwan, I think all we can do is expect Xi Jinping and his colleagues is smart enough. They can find out a way to solve the problem, end the protest, and give us a happy ending. I think that's all we can expect. Okay, this is the issue we're going to talk tonight.